Welcome to this first normal session after the opening keynote, where we'll be talking about running Dynamics NAV on Azure. You could argue the presentation should rather be called Running Dynamics NAV as a Service, as most of the content is not specific to Azure. With me today I have Christian Heidedam, who is a developer who's been working on the one-click installer, Stefan Omdahl, who will be talking about authentication, and I'm Jens Møller Petersen, and I'm development manager in the server team in NAV. Before going into details about Dynamics NAV on Azure, we're going to go back to NAV 2009 and take a look at the three-tier setup we had with 2009. The first thing that you remember is it was based on Windows authentication, so the first piece that was necessary was to have an Active Directory. This is the first problem that you'll encounter if you want to move to Azure, is you don't really have an Active Directory anymore. If you read some of the news groups, then you've probably heard about Azure Active Directory, which is a new way of having users on Azure, but that's not available yet. So back in 2009, you had to put up your users in Active Directory, and you had to set up a SQL Server, at least if you wanted to run three-tier, no native database for three-tier. And you would put up an app server. And in this case, you would have 2 sessions running on your NAV server. And you would connect your clients to those sessions. In 2009, you were limited to RTC clients. And in an Azure setting, well, it's not that nice that you have to go out to all your customers and install the client. It doesn't really help you that much. But in 2009, you were limited to the RTC, so that needed to be installed on the local computers. So in this case, we have user 1 and user 2 for these 2 clients connecting to the NST. And from the NST, you connect to SQL Server as those 2 users. Furthermore, this required us to use delegation, so that you had to set up service principal names, constrained delegation, etc. And I'm sure quite a few of you have struggled with that. It was definitely one of the hardest part about NAV 2009, and we got a lot of requests to get some help. We did a best practice analyzer, but overall it is just hard to set up. You also had the classic client, which could go directly against SQL Server, so quite a few partners decided to go with that. And you had the NAS. So if you look at this, there are several problems if you want to move to a completely different topology. So in 2013, we still have SQL Server, and we still have an app server. So far, so good. Then I put in an NST process on that NAV server and an IIS process that is hosted on the same machine. And then we have the 2 sessions again on the NST. But this time, we have different types of clients. We still have the RTC, which we now call the Windows client, because all clients are role-tailored. We're striving that you get the same type of experience no matter what client you use. But we also now have a web client and a SharePoint client. And in this example, the web client will then go through the IIS to the NST. And in this case, user 1 and user 2 are connecting using Live ID. Later, we will demonstrate how you can set that up. Another new thing in 2013 is that we now access SQL Server using one single account, so you don't need to set up delegation anymore in on-prem installations if you run the Windows client or web client. Seaside still exists, but it is now only a development environment, no execution of AL runtime, and the NAS. Well, this has basically been replaced by a role of the NST, where you can set up the NST to run background sessions just like you could with the NAS. And this puts us in a much better situation for hosting and running NAV as a server, because we've gone away from a number of the legacy components, so we're just about ready. Now we could make this simpler. Even here you have a few different boxes. Now probably one of the simplest configurations you could get is if you would decide to put the SQL Server on the same machine as the NST. There might be performance reasons for not doing it, but of course it depends on the customer. If you only want to have one machine, then this is simpler. And then you could put Seaside on it, and instead of using a physical machine, you could use a virtual machine, and then you could access Seaside through remote desktop if you would need it, and you would have Windows client, etc. This is something that has nothing to do really with Azure. This can be done on any virtual machine. So the interesting part here is that the easiest way to actually think of this and go into Azure is within a few months, you will get an Azure virtual machine. It will ship from Microsoft in a few months. You can't find the exact ship date on NMSDN. I think what's posted there is Q1 2013. So what you actually get here is the simplest route to Azure is to just think of it as a virtual machine. The main part here being that if you get authentication right, you get your client installations right, then whether you host your virtual machine in a data center, in a private cloud, on Azure, doesn't really make that much a difference to you. So if you've downloaded the RTM version of NAV 2013, you might have noticed that there really isn't anything Azure specific in there. We could have decided to ship what we've demoed with running NAV in worker roles and web roles, but we decided that since the Azure virtual machine has not been released yet, we wanted to wait until that one is available to give you the choice of actually running it there. This is very similar to the experience you've had so far, and with our current NAV architecture, then the Azure virtual machine is, depending on the final pricing, etc., seems to be just as good a bet as running it in web roles and worker roles. Therefore, the DVD you can download does not contain any Azure-specific bits, but the bits you actually have there are ready for deploying to Azure when the Azure virtual machine ships. Together with that, we'll probably add some scripting to make deployment easier. But the message is actually you can start tomorrow. Just remove the word Azure, and then you've basically got what you need to run NAV as a service. And of course, you can also split it up into multiple Azure VMs so that you have the NAV server on one machine, the SQL server on another machine. So you can basically think of Azure as a place where you can get the same kind of configurations as you can on-premise. But in order to get this to work, there were a few things that we needed to change. We needed to change the authentication and delegation, etc. But I think the biggest change we've made is actually to how you set up users, how you authenticate, etc., because that is very different from the 2009 paradigm where you would either run Windows locally or Windows authentication remotely. So the first thing we're going to cover in detail is the authentication in NAV 2013, and Stefan will come up here and walk you through that piece.
Thank you, Jens. Yeah, I'm going to talk about securing Azure applications. Well, the title is a bit misleading because it says NAV 2009 R2. Identities, what are your options? Well, everybody knows Windows. We have this integrated Windows authentication where you try to log in as a user, but you don't really provide credentials. You just log into the operating system, and bingo, you can access everything. You can access Exchange servers and SharePoint servers and also the RTC, all the web services. Everything works integrated. And then we have this additional feature. It's called RTC over WAN. And what it basically is remote Windows authentication. So you are able to log in to a remote Windows machine where you're prompted with credentials. Please type in your username, password, but not locally, but on the remote machine. And then you're actually able to access an app server hosted somewhere. It could be Azure, but it could be any hosting provider. For 2030, well, what options do we have? We still have the Windows integrated option, and this quoted, it says Windows. That's because we have a config setting on the server and on the client where it says what kind of credential type do you want to transfer from the client to the server, and that value is Windows. And it supports all clients: RTC, web services, OData, web client, SharePoint, PowerShell, NAS, and background sessions. Everything is supported by Windows. And that's kind of the typical scenario when running on-prem. Then we have still the remote Windows user, also named as username in the config file. And it works for all clients, but not PowerShell, NAS, and SharePoint client. Well, it might work, but if you are running these kinds of services, I don't know if you've been to the keynote and saw the NAS. Well, it is running, even though we are using username or remote Windows, but it's just the local Windows service running the NAS that is logging in. That's why in the keynote that Michael Nielsen, he had to go in and ensure that network service, it was a user known to NAV. Then we have a new concept. It's a NAV username and password. And if you look at the value, then it says NAV user password. I will just show it here. NAV user password goes in the config file. And it also works with most clients, not PowerShell, NAS, and SharePoint. And what it means is that basically you have a table, a user table in NAV. You have multiple, but you have all the users stored in NAV. So you have basically a username and a password and stuff like expiration date and other things. But everything is stored in NAV, so it works everywhere. You don't need an Active Directory. You don't need local Windows users. It's just stored in NAV. Easy to port to other systems. Everything is in the database. And then we have federated identity. And the value in the config file is called access control service. And it works only with RTC and web client. And the reason for that is that this is a truly Azure or hosted specific config setting. And the reason I mention Azure in this content is that you need to pay for an Azure subscription in order to actually use this. But once you have it, then you have access to the access control service, which has a portal I will show a little bit later. And you can use it everywhere. You can use it on-prem. But it works out of the box with Live ID, Google, Yahoo, and with a little bit of configuration, also Facebook. So if you trust either of these identity providers, then you can configure NAV to authenticate one of these users, for instance, a Google user. You can also configure it to work with federated Active Directory. So if you have an Active Directory and you want to preserve your users in there, then you can configure that one to communicate with ACS. And then you are actually using all your users in your Active Directory in the cloud. I will give a little demo now. Oh. There we go. That's good. I'll just stop the slideshow for a little while so you get a normal desktop. I have a couple of scripts here, and these scripts are used to set up, configure the running NAV server and client. And what these scripts are doing is basically, well, I can switch the authentication type, client credential type on the server and on the client by running one of these scripts. And default, when you install the demo installation, client, server, then everything is running Windows. And if I start up my client here, yep. I started up. It's on the other client, but you can see here. Just a sec. Okay. You can see that I started up the client, and I will go and find the users page right there. And I have 2 users. I'll create a new one so we can see I can log on with this new user. And this is the new user card. I'll type in the name, NAV user, and say that this user is enabled. You can see here I can choose enable, disabled, type in a full name. Yeah. NAV user, expiry date. I don't need to fill it out, then it never expires. I can attach a Windows user if I'm running in an Active Directory. I don't want to do that right now, but I would rather log in as a NAV user with a password. So I need to provide a password here, and I will type password 1, 2, 3, 4, and password 1, 2, 3. I will try to press OK. And you can see there's some validation errors. Yeah. Oh, it's not really good. That didn't match. So we have some special validation rules here in the password fields. Everything is AL, so you can kind of create your own. Right now in the demo, we need at least 8 characters, combined numbers and letters. So I will type in password 1, 2, 3, 4. See if it passes. Yes, it does. And then I will also go in here and you can see it's the ACS, that's the Access Control Service status. That one is disabled now. The first time I need to log in with ACS, I need to provide some sort of PIN code to ensure that I'm me. And this PIN code can be auto-generated. It's a button up here. Or I can type in something like PIN code 1, 2, 3, 4. And you can see now the status has changed to pending. Then I will also go down and set permissions to users, eller super. Yeah. And press OK. That's fine. It's complaining about that the system has been configured to run Windows, and I've created a user that is not using Windows. So that's what the dialog is all about. Okay, I will close the client and run one of the scripts here. Well, username authentication, that's a remote Windows, the RTC or WAN. You probably know that for 2009 R2, so I don't want to use that. But instead, I will run this script. Use a nav user password authentication. What is this? Admin. Takes a little second. You can see it's doing stuff here. And once it's done, there we go. And I'll start the client again. And right now, by starting the client, I'm presented this dialog. So I need to log in using this nav user and password. And I will type nav user and password 1234. Yep. And it's trying to log in. And I'm presented this other little dialog where I need to change the password. That's because when you log in the first time, there's a little extra checkbox in the user page where you can say, do you want the user to change password next time? And I have that checked, and that's checked by default. So I need to type in the password. And a new one. Actually, the old one will do. There we go. It's changed, and you can see I got the welcome message. So I'm basically logged in now. It's fine. I will then try to log in using ACS. Yeah, run as admin. So it's shutting down the server, reconfiguring everything, and you can see I get this dialog that the server is shutting down, basically. So the only thing I can do is press OK. Then I will start up again. And I get a totally different sign-in page now. You can see I get this page coming from ACS, where I can choose what kind of identity provider I trust. You can trust Live, Google, Yahoo, and Facebook, in this case. And I will just pick one. So pick Google here, and I need to log into Google. As you can see, then I'm typing a Hotmail account. Well, Google is not bound to having Gmail accounts. You can have basically everything. So this is just my mail. And I'll type in the password. And I keep this one, preserve being logged in Danish. So it keeps a cookie on my login credentials, and I can log in automatically next time. So I will log in. And now nav shows me this dialog. So this is the first time I'm trying to log in with ACS, with my Google identity. And I'm forced to enter a username known to nav, and this first time authentication key. And that's the kind of PIN code I need to enter in order to get in. So I will type my username, and that's nav user, and PIN code 1234. Oh, and yeah, the dialog is already there, so I'm logged in. And you can see in the status bar in a little while when it starts. Down here, you can see, I'll just move it up a little bit, but it says now user. So I'm taking this stomdale@hotmail.com and mapping to a nav user, named nav user, and you can see that here. Okay. Close the client, and back to the slides. Okay. So, why do we need this? Well, basically, nobody has an Active Directory on Azure or maybe other hosting providers don't want to have all these user repositories, Active Directories or anything. So we need to make a solution where we can say we don't want to duplicate these accounts. We basically just need one repository for users and use it everywhere. And this is exactly what Identity Federation gives you. So you can have a remote, think of it as a remote Active Directory, where you can gain this single sign-on experience. And everything is just kept one place. Just going to pause a little bit. Excuse me. There's a lot of echo. It's very annoying. Hello? Yeah. Okay. This is Access Control Service, and I will just go over here. And you can see what happens when a user tries to log in. Basically, we're using a client. We have this maybe Susan character. She's using a client, and she wants to log in to NAV. That's the application down here. And then she has to enter her credentials for one of the given identity providers. And ACS supports Live, Google, Yahoo, Facebook, and it's kind of out of the box. I will show you that in a second. And then we have the remote Active Directory, where you can basically provide any identity providers or configure any identity provider that supports OpenID. OpenID is supported by Google and Yahoo in this case. And then the credentials are being sent to the ACS, Access Control Service, which has an STS. And STS stands for Security Token Service. So it receives a token and sends a token. That's basically the nature of an STS. And then the client receives this token and gives the ACS token to the application. That's Dynamics NAV 2013. And there must be a trust between the application and the Access Control Service in order for NAV to actually trust this security token it receives. But we also need to get a little terms defined here in order to continue. It can be pretty complicated, but it's something that is fundamental when you want to go into the ACS portal and configure that one, ACS, Access Control Service portal. And one of them is the IDP, that's Identity Provider. And well, this is just the place that authenticates users and issues tokens. So this can be Live, for instance. If you trust Live ID, then you have a Live ID account with mail and maybe a share somewhere. And you also have the ability to log into Live and let Live authenticate you and send you back this security token, can be used elsewhere. So that's the identity provider. And next we have the STS, Security Token Service. Well, and basically what it does, it receives the token from the identity provider and transforms it into something known or usable by the configured application, in our case NAV, and then it kind of maps all the identity information in the identity provider token into something understandable by NAV. So it receives a token and sends a token. And then we have a relying party. That's some Azure application, in our case, Dynamics NAV. And it trusts all security tokens coming from the STS and performs the authentication. And you can see it here. We have the client that talks to Dynamics NAV. And it says, oh, you need to log in. So you are redirected to ACS. It's the configuration. We need to authenticate against ACS. Oh, but we need to pick an identity provider. Back to the client. And we need to log into the identity provider. And it can issue a token, given the security credentials you have sent were correct. Redirect to ACS again. Send the token to ACS. And validate the token, run the rules, issue a new token, and this token is now being posted to the original application that the user is running, validating the token, and you have a session. So all this happens in ACS. It's what I have demoed in my example just before. And I will briefly go in to the ACS portal. Oh, I won't. Just a sec. We can log in here. So we need to log in to get ACS. So this is the portal of ACS, and it's fairly simple to configure. We have identity providers, all the ones I've chosen. Then we have relying party applications. I just have this nav tech days, where I'm configuring a lot of stuff. I will go back to that later if there's time. Otherwise, you can find me at the tech booth. But if I deselect everything except the Google I have now and press save, then you will be able to see a little difference when I'm logging in. So right now I'll start the client again. And you can see here, it's logging in, but whoopsie, it disappeared again and I'm logged in. Everything is single sign-on because there's only one identity provider, so you don't need me to pick one. And Google, if you remember, then I stored the cookie, so you can automatically log in. So this is a great experience. And just go back to the demo. Okay. Then I want to deploy it to Azure. Well, basically, it's very simple, as Jens told you just before. It's basically just a virtual machine. So you can go in and you can create a virtual machine, you can upload it, or you can create your own virtual machine on Azure based on a different set of templates, and just press a button, say create, and then it stands there for 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, and then it's fully operational. And I have one of those. The UI is very simple, but it's not available to everybody right now. It's a technical preview of the Azure portal, but once it's created, then I will just get a remote desktop connection. I can open firewall ports, I can close them, I can do everything. But the only thing I'm prompted is kind of the size of this virtual machine in resources and a password. So I will log in. You can see it's just a virtual machine like anything else. No, you can't see it. Sorry. Here we go. I logged in. I can copy a little file to it. Select one here. This one, copy, and doesn't really matter. Just to show that paste takes a little while. It copies the file up there. It's basically just another virtual machine, but it's running in the cloud. I have the same scripts here. Right now, I have just installed the demo, and it's running Windows, but I can change configuration. So you can use NAV user password authentication, run as administrator. Basically the same thing happening as in the local box. So, and I can start the web client. You can see I'm prompted for user. I'll type nav user and password 1234. Press enter. See, I'm logging in. This is locally on the machine, but I have also enabled the endpoint towards you guys, so everybody is able to log in. And that's just the same address, but without port 8080. So if I close this one and start a local Internet Explorer, it's right here. Type the address. It's actually here. Navtech Days login. You can see I'm logging into the web server in the cloud running NAV on a virtual machine. Nav user password 1234. Sign in, and I'm in. Oh, there you go. I can also do the same for the RTC client. It's basically the same. You just need to open a port, connect remotely, and you're up and running. Go back to the presentation. So you can actually try it out if you have access. I don't know if you have right now, but you're definitely able to. And with this, I will hand it over to Christian. It's coming here. Yeah, welcome.
So let me just duplicate these two so you can see everything that I can see. So now Stefan has set up an Azure VM. So he created a VM on the Azure portal. He copied the setup files. He ran the setup. He installed the web client. He can send out links to his end users and they can connect. That's great. But what about the people that are heavy users that need to enter a lot of data or who need the integration to Excel, for example? They would still like to have the Windows client. And so I have the USB stick here, and I'll put it in my pocket and get in my car, drive out to the customer, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Or maybe there's a better way. And there is. So what I will do now, and you can memorize this link if you have access, you have your machine open and you have access to the web. We memorize this link and try it out. But what I'll do now is go to my remote desktop. Where's that? Click. I thought I said not to extend. Okay, so here's my remote desktop. This is, damn it. Where's the link, Stefan? Here? So you can see it's just a VM. It's in Microsoft's data center. And I'm logged in. So what I want to do is create a website and send a link to the end users. And the end users can then themselves install the Win client. And so to do that, I need to set up a website. So I'll open IIS to do that. Okay. Add a new website. Call it NavWin client, doesn't matter. I need to point it to a folder. Create a new folder here. Also call that NavWin client. And I'll use port 81 because port 80 is used by the web client. And the 81 port is also enabled as an Azure endpoint. That basically means that connections from the outside are allowed into the VM. We did that already. So if I open a browser now and type in the name of this machine is Nav Tech Days, and you see it all there, port 81, press enter, damn it, it's already there. So you can see that there's a website that what you saw before was cached. So there's a website, but it's empty, and we need to put something on it. So let me open the folder. I don't need the IIS anymore. It's all empty. We need to put some stuff in it. So when Stefan installed NAV on this machine, he checked off the settings saying he wanted some help with deploying, like I'm going to show you. And that gave him some files, some templates that is a good starting point for what I'm about to do. So you can see the Win client is here, and there are some installer tools. And here's a link to online documentation that basically tells you everything that I'm showing you now and more. And then there's some template files. And I'll just cover it, and there's only 3 files, but they are a good starting point, 4 files. Copy them over here. Like that. Close that one. And I'll rename this file to default.htm. That means the IIS will pick it up automatically. So if I press F5 here, you can see now it picked up my default.htm file. It's just a simple HTML file with a little bit of content in it. And you're free to change it. I'm free to change it to make it look nicer. So this is the page that end users will see. So, and they will see that, okay, they need to install 2 prerequisites. They need to install the report viewer and the chart controls. They are needed for the Windows client to work properly. So they need to press this button, run the installer for them, and that's it. The good thing is that this is really simple. They don't need to make any decisions. They just have to press finish, and it's done. And it's a one-time thing. So once it is installed, it's serviced by Windows Update and all that. And they don't need to do it again. And once they've done that, they can read the license terms and acknowledge that they are okay with them, and then press this button. So this button is pointing to one of the files that I just copied in. And let me go to that. So it's pointing to this file. And this file is a little bit special. It's an XML file. It's not very big, maybe 50 lines. But it's a click once file. Click Once is a technology that is part of the .NET framework. It's been that since .NET 2.0, so it's old, it works. And I'll get back to what this XML file means. First, I want to talk about the application files. The application files is whatever is in that folder will be copied down to the end user machine when they press this button on the front on the web page. So in this folder, there are already two files, an icon and another Click Once XML file. But we need the Win client, all the product files there, to be copied down to the end user machines. So we need to add some files here. And let me just do that. So it's basically all the files that make up the Windows client. So I'll take these files, copy them over here, like that. And there's one more file we need. Can you guess which? It's the client user settings file. We have our file in this folder. So I'll copy that over as well. Paste. And where did it go? Up there. So remember, all these files will be copied to the end user machines, and then the client will start there. The client user settings, it works fine here because the server has been specified as localhost, but of course it won't work like that when copied to end user machines. So we need to point it to our VM, and that was called navtechdays. Like that. So all these files, that's all I need to have copied to the end user machine in order to execute the Windows client. So remember the two files that were there originally. The icon file, that will be shown in the whole process that you will see soon. And then there was this manifest file. This manifest file is sort of metadata about this application. It has to contain the full list of files and some more things. And I'll modify that now. Let me just close this window. So let me start a command prompt. So here we have all the files. And this manifest file looks like this. So let me just quickly go through it. There's nothing magical about it. It has an identity. It's not really an assembly. It's an application, but they still call it assembly identity. So it has an identity. It can be anything. I can write anything here. It has a version number. I can also choose a version that I like. Then it has the icon that will be shown during the installation process and in the start menu after it has been installed. It's an entry point. So what should happen when all these files have been copied to the end user machines? Well, it should run the client executable. Something about trust here. And we are running with full trust, which is the same as when you install in the traditional way. Some dependencies. You have to have a minimum version number of the operating system. We support, for example, Windows 7, so it's fine. And .NET version 4 is also automatically available on Windows 7 machines and up. And then it has two dependencies. Those were the two that I showed on the first website. So if a user forgets to install them, they will be told so. And then at the bottom here, I need to list all the files that I put in that folder. Oops. So I can start now and say, it'll take a while. Are you okay with that? There's a better way. Because there's a tool, which is part of the Microsoft SDK that you can download from the web. Click once. It's called Mage. And I'll ask it to update this manifest file and add all the files that are in the current directory. So let's see what it looks like now. So now you see all the files down here. The identities, they have a hash. It serves a couple of purposes. One is that it detects if you have changed one of your files. So it's kind of a security feature. And the second is, suppose you put out an upgrade, but you didn't change all the files. Then based on looking at the hash, it knows when it can skip the downloading and use the previous version. So it limits the download size a lot. So that was it. Oops. We have all these files. And now we need to go one level out again to this first XML file. This is just a thin wrapper around the application files. It's sort of a pointer. When somebody runs this one, please install the files in the application files folder. So I need to update that. So it too has an identity. It's just an identity I can put in anything, as long as it's unique, so it doesn't get confused. What should we do? What should we call it? Nav. Check this. It won't be shown anywhere. But what will be shown is the description elements here. There's a publisher. So who's publishing this? Well, it's a Microsoft, but maybe we added our own add-ins to this file folder. Let's say Mbuso. And the product, we can give it a name as well. Say, well, this is for all of you, if you want to try it out. Something about update policy. So so one of the major advantages of this is once an end user has installed this on his machine, if I, as a partner, put out a new version on the server, it will automatically get pushed out to the end user machine. And so we have the opportunity to configure when it checks for updates. So right now you can see it is configured to check for updates before the application starts up. So when an end user runs the application, before it actually runs the exe file, it checks for updates. Where should it check for updates? Well, it should actually point to this very file. And where did we deploy this file? On the Azure VM, this port, and in the folder deployment, and the name of this file. Okay, but remember this is really just a pointer to the application files, more specifically the XML file inside the application files. That's this one. So, sort of at runtime, where will this be located? Well, it will be located at the same location, except it will be inside the application files folder. Like that. And you see here, this was the identity of the other XML file. So if I changed it the other place, I would need to change it here as well, and the version number. So I'm actually done with all these files now, and it's ready. There's one little caveat here. How will the files actually go from the server and down to the end user machine? Well, it's the IIS web server that will download them to you. And IIS has some issues with certain file types, like config files. It'd rather not download them by default, but in this case we wanted to give them out. So we need to configure that. And I have a little file that will tell IIS it's okay. So if I open it up, you can see, okay, it says config files, TLB, MSC. It's okay that end users can download these to their machine. And I also disabled caching if you have a proxy server, for example, because it's best if you demo it when you demo it. So I'm done. So if we go back to this, if I press this button, it will run this file. It will Actually, when I say run, it will download it to the end user machine, which in this case is the same machine. It will see, oh, it's a click once file. Click once is part of the .NET framework. It knows how to handle them. So look at it and see, oh, there's a pointer to the other XML file, so I better download that too. And looks at that one, and then downloads all the files. And it puts all those files in a hidden folder on your machine. And once it's done that, it runs the exe file. So let's see how it works. So this is the end user experience that I'm going to show you how it works. So, see, this is a click once dialog. It has already downloaded the first file, and it's just, tasting it. Does it look okay? So it says, are you sure you want to download this application for NAV-TechDisk participants from this place? It can't see who published it. It is possible to sign the files, the XML files. And so you can say, this is really from Mebuso. But we didn't do that. If you have a certificate, it's straightforward. But I trust this. See, it downloaded it. And it starts the application now. So I really pushed it out to the end user machine. And it had the right client user settings that pointed to the right server with the right authentication type, everything. So I don't want to log in. So that's how easy it is. And if we look at the start menu, you can see it's right there, so I can run it again. See that little window that popped up there? It was doing the upgrade check. So if a new version was available on the server, it would have downloaded it seamlessly. And if I look closely in here, I will be able to see, where's that? That's this one. This one was installed when Stefan installed all the, the demo installation of NAV. So they are able to work fine side by side. And actually I can have as many of these click once deployed Windows clients on my machine as I want. They are all kind of living in a sandbox, not from a security point of view, but from a file point of view and start menu and so on. If I go to the programs and features, you can see it's sorted by installation date, and so you can see it's been a few days since Stefan installed this, but we just installed this. I can easily uninstall it. So isn't that a nice end-user experience? They just press the button, it gets downloaded, they don't even have to do anything, and runs. If I go out here, this is now we're back on the laptop here, we're not on the Azure VM anymore. Oh, maybe I have the presentation actually. I click this link. Click. And you can see it is really running the web page that I just created up there. And if I click this button, sorry. Okay, now you can see it is really pointing to the web page I just created. And if I click this button, it will let me install it. And this takes a while because the connection is not that good here. So let me just quickly go through what I did again, because I want to stress that it is really simple. You see, I have all the application files that I just copied from the traditional installer. I can add additional languages here. I can add additional add-ins. I can really control everything here. Then I have an icon file, one XML file, a little bit of metadata. Outside here, I have another XML file web config file, and that's it. So I hope you see the simplicity of this. Okay, now it's installed. Ta-da. Okay. Now I see the presentation on my screen. Okay, let me go. Can you read this? It's a preview of PowerPoint 2013. Isn't it nice when it works? Okay, so what you just saw, if you want to try this out, by all means go ahead and try this out, and it will download on your machine, and you can run against our server. That's how easy it is. So some of the, there's a lot of benefits when you deploy the Windows client like this. You have centralized control of a lot of things. You can choose, or you can control what version of the client gets deployed, if there are any hotfixes applied, and so on. What the client user settings, what server should it point to, authentication type. So imagine you want to move your server to another place. Well, you just push out a new version that is pointing to that one. Easy. You can bundle your own add-ins or third-party add-ins. You can add additional languages if you want. All of this is controlled centrally. As I also showed, you can have side-by-side installation. For example, if you want to have a production system, but you also want to try out a new version as test system. It could be a different version altogether. The end users have an easy experience. They don't need IT people like me to go out and help them, or super users to help them. And the upgrade experience, which I didn't show you, is completely seamless. So the end users will just notice, it's downloading a few more files, but that's it. There are a few limitations when you deploy the Win client like this. Because of the way it is executed, you cannot pass command line parameters to it. You cannot give it the hyperlink that says, go to a specific page or something like that. And you can send data to Excel, but once you're inside Excel, you can't refresh. So these are some of the limitations. So you have to figure out if the benefits outweigh the limitation. So imagine you wanna patch your installation, right? You can just remote log in, update the server, update the application, import FOB files, and update the web client. And you can prepare a new version of the Win client that will be automatically downloaded the next time end users run. All right, so that's actually the end of the presentation. So our goal today has been to show that deploying to Azure is easy. You can create a VM in the portal, you can remote desktop to it, copy files over, run the installation as you used to. You can use ACS or nav user password for authentication, and you can deploy the Win client with click once. Some of the benefits, the cloud in general gives you some benefits. You can pay for hardware, for example, as you go. You don't need upfront to buy new hardware. You have centralized control of everything. The authentication, if you use ACS, is an industry standard. If you trust that, then and users will, customers, when you talk to customers, they will also trust that. And end users will have some benefits too. If Stefan demoed, when you save your cookies on your machine, they will have easy sign-on without getting prompted to all the systems like SkyDrive, Office 365, and so on. And the installation and maintenance of the Win client is for free. And with that, do you want to show more?
Yeah, I have a little extra thing, something we skipped, because we were a little late, and it wasn't really certain when we were going to start. But I have a little extra bonus slide, you might call it. This one, I will just see if I can extend just a sec. And here we go. I don't know if you recall the user page here, but we have something called Web Services Access. And you can see here, something I didn't mention when I first configured. But Web Services Access, well, there's a long key there. It's called Web Services Access Key. And when you press the Assist Edit, you will get this new little page where you're just able to press one button, say Generate, so you can generate a Web Service Access Key, and you can set expiration to it. So this key will only be valid for a month, 2 months, 2 days, something. And what this case meant for is, well, if you have configured the system to authenticate either this NAV user password concept or using ACS, and you want to log in programmatically, so you have a little program running that is trying to log on to web services, maybe OData, request some data and log off again, and all this should be done automatically. Then you probably don't want to store your username and password inside this application, or you don't want to store it inside Excel if you're using Power Pivot. So in order to prevent users from having passwords stored all over, we invented this concept called the access key that can only be used with web services and OData. So it can only be used to log on to these published pages and code units, and therefore not really be used in general just to start up the web client or RTC. And I want to show how it works briefly. There we go. I will start Excel. And first of all, I will just switch to duplicate so you can see what I'm doing. Probably help a little bit. Then I will start the tools, ensure that I'm running either NAV user password or ACS, doesn't really matter. Same concept. As administrator. And the client closes. Yep, it's fine. Try to log on, see if I can do that. Nav user, password 1234. Just repeating the password over and over again and the user over and over again so you can remember it if you're going to try it out. Here we go. Search for the user's card. And I will pick the nav user. Down here, I haven't configured this web service access key. I'll need to go in. Yeah, it's fine. Never expires. It's also fine. So I have this key now. I don't really know how to type that big value, so I need to copy it. There we go. Copy just to make sure that it's copied. And I can use that key to log in using web services. So if I go over here and I say web services. And you can see I'm prompted like it would be. Normally I can of course type my nav user and password 1234. I can log in. But I can also use the web service account key that only works here. So I type in nav user and this key. Press OK. And you can see, well, right now I don't really have much, so this is just the one of the default services. We have service and companies and system service. So you can see I'm logged in. I can also do it in Excel with OData, where what you really want to do is just open a new blank workbook, go to data, get external data, and you can get it from other sources. It could be from OData, and I need a link to OData. If I don't remember it, then I can look it up in the event log where it's writing. This is the OData feed. See if I can remember it. Or maybe even better. Could be having a document with it stored already. Nope. Okay, I'll create a new one. Localhost, and the default port is 748. First I need to type the server instance name. 70 OData companies. And I don't want to sign in with default information. I need to log in using my nav user and this password still stored. It's fine. See if it works. The URI is invalid. Okay, just a sec. Been starting and stopping a lot of what? That's right. Here we go. Can find a no data connection. Here we go. User key there. Let's log in. Okay. So what did I miss here? Company. Yeah. That's the one. Doesn't really matter, but now it's getting the available companies, and of course there's only one. But what I can do here is that I can save the connection information to nav or NAV. So I can store my username and this web service access key, because I mean you can't really do anything else but just access what you have published or what I've published. And it's also respecting the roles permission set of NAV. So it's fairly simple just to store all information in Excel and send it around so everybody can refresh the OData feed, refresh the report, and see the new information. So I think that's pretty cool as well. And with that, I think we are back to questions. Here we go. Yeah.
Yes, so if you have any. So you mean whether you can have multiple authentication mechanisms at the same time? No, currently we do not support that. You have to pick what authentication mode you run for that NST. Now you can have separate types of users in the database, so you can set up multiple NSTs and obtain it that way. But currently there is a limitation of only one authentication method per NST. And for the good question, you get a t-shirt.
Yeah, the question was about OpenID, or how do you add new identity providers? Well, basically, when you open ACS, you have these 4 options that is configurable from the portal out of the box. It's basically just a check mark, and you get a little page. Do you want to enable, disable? Yes, no. And same with federated AD, where you have some simple fields you need to fill out. But if you are having other OpenID providers, then you need to go through a REST API, also provided by ACS. You cannot use the portal. You need to use a management API to do it, or do it programmatically. But you deserve a t-shirt. There. Yeah. Do you want to? Okay. Could you repeat the question? Yeah, the question was if it's possible to add filters before fetching OData. OData from the server, and the answer is yes. You can apply filters, so you don't necessarily need to take all information down to Excel before filtering.
Yeah, there are several options there. You could either create a query which gives you exactly the data you want. You can put in AL code in a specific page that you expose to OData. So it's the same type of filtering as you would do normally in NAV, just that you're accessing this from OData. So the question is whether you need to define it inside NAV. Now the OData does contain syntax for filtering in the actual URL that you provide. Now you don't have the same freedom in filtering as you do from inside NAV, but you can get some filtering done just through the OData query that you issue. Does that make sense?
Question up there?
We have a question down here.
It's available.
Yes. The question was whether the what we've demoed is available on the DVD for setting up port 81 for one-click installer.
So what we demoed here was all of it was NAV 2013. The only thing that is not completely available yet is the Azure VM part. But everything we demoed applies equally well to any VM. So the question is, how does it work with add-in? And I'm not sure about the part with .NET assemblies. I mean, this all depends on .NET 4, which says if you have a machine that has Windows 7 or above on it, will be available, guaranteed. So if you have, so that will be there. Or what else are you looking for?
So the question was, how does this work with registration of add-ins with respect to CFMD? Now we're actually looking at exactly that requirement in the CFMD because it was more targeted the COM add-ins that we used to have, because the add-ins for the RTC does not really need to be registered except in the database where you put in the publisher signature. So this is something we're looking at for the CFMD. And taking that apart, then it's just putting it in the add-ins folder and getting it downloaded to the RTC. But good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was a question over there. Yes? You.
The remote deployment where it's copying the files down the file, does that mean that it's just literally copying a directory, or are there any sort of registry entries to be updated?
It is just, the question is, when it copies down the files in the Click Once deployment, does it just copy the files, or is there any registry things happening? It doesn't need any. So the files are really just copied down there. I mean, you can take the files, put them on a USB, take a clean Windows machine, copy them over there. It would be the same thing. I mean, in terms of the files. But Click Once does some magic. It keeps track of it, right? So it shows you that it is installed inside the programs and features. So it knows that it's installed and lets you uninstall and these things. But the files themselves are just there.
We have a question down there. I'm sorry, you won't get a T-shirt. We have T-shirts now.
The cloud tools that were on the beta, the PowerShell scripts, are they dead and gone?
So the question is whether the cloud tools that were on the beta, whether they're dead and gone. I wouldn't say they're dead and gone, but they were not shipped together with the RTM version. The reason being we actually want to evaluate what's the best option for our partners with Azure Virtual Machine versus Worker Role, Web Role, and we didn't really want to send partners down a road which may not be optimal. So we decided to walk with caution there. So they have not been shipped on the RTM DVD. We'll wait until the Azure Virtual Machine ships, and then, yes, they might be. That's a very good way of putting it. You should note that whatever you want to do to run NAV as a service, you can start doing that today with the RTM bits, because the Azure Virtual Machine is just like any other virtual machines, and all the authentication you need to set up, how you want an organization to run a service, etc., is the same. The rest is basically just technology. So you don't have to hold back. But we decided to be a little cautious in that respect.
Also have a question out there.
As you said that Windows Azure is the same as the other virtual machines. So can we use this, partners can also use it for clients, for serving the clients. So they can store the installation at their end and serve the client.
So is the question about the Click Once deployment? Whether that will work outside of Azure or what?
I think it's a general question about Azure virtual machines, if they're working like normal virtual machines. Well, basically they do, but the only...
My question is that, as you said that Azure virtual machines are same as the normal machines, normal virtual machines. So can partners also install the Navision server and applications for clients and serve them just like you are doing on Azure?
And the question is if it's just like a normal virtual machine, so partners or customers can install NAV running on a virtual machine on Azure? And the answer is, well, the simple answer is yes, but it's not available yet. It's a preview, and it will be in Q1.
Well, again, we don't know exact ship dates. If you read MSDN, you can see different ship dates, but it's in the near future.
Yeah.
Can we just stress that the Azure VM is just a VM?
Yeah.
So-
There's a thin layer around it, which is called Azure, that will you need to configure the endpoints. Basically, that's it. So it won't allow traffic unless you open endpoints. That's outside the VM. But other than that, it's a VM with the VHD file and all that. So
Yeah, and the data that you store on the VM is persisted in Azure storage, so you'll get this triple replica, etc. In case your Azure virtual machine dies, then you still have what was saved to that hard drive, etc.
question there? Is VMware supported? I don't know enough about VM.
On Azure virtual machines, well, I don't actually know.
No.
So Hyper-V can create you a VM. Azure can create you a VM. If VMware can create you a VM, it should be supported.
Yeah, we have a question up there.
Okay, yeah. I'll try to quickly answer the question about, well, you have VMs and then you have running them as a service, which I interpret as running them as basically as platform as a service instead of infrastructure as a service. Now, we've developed that. You've seen it demoed at previous conferences. And basically, we're evaluating what gives the best price for the customer and what's the easiest maintainable for the partner. In the end, what technology is behind doesn't matter. What matters in the end is the bill you have to send to the customer. And therefore, we want to evaluate the Azure virtual machine against the worker roles and recommend the solution that gives the lowest bill to the customer. The actual running of the service is basically the same thing, whether you connect to SQL Express, SQL Server, or SQL Azure. Well, it doesn't matter that much in what you need to provide as a partner, what kind of service you need to provide if you want to run NAV as a service. So you can easily run NAV as a service, even though you're hosting it on an Azure virtual machine. Seen from the customer, that should not matter whatsoever. Technically, the difference is between the elasticity, where you get more elasticity with worker roles. So there is some small technical differences, but overall, those are technicalities that are interesting for us. For the customers, it shouldn't really matter. And for that matter, you can probably switch behind the scenes later.